Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. So first things first, happy March and even happier Women's History Month. This week I wanted to highlight a few films that center on themes I think both celebrate women's history, particularly women's history in creative fields, but also focus on some current shifts and mindsets in those fields today. As in, the things that are going on in these particular films that we're going to cover could potentially be really, really impactful in the very near future. As always, these films are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. So without any further ado, let's get to the recs. So all three of today's recommendations happen to be documentaries, and all three also happen to be available via our streaming services. The first of those is available on Canopy, and that is 2015's Love Between the Covers, a look at the billion-dollar romance fiction industry. This documentary is a really, really fun, fascinating watch. If you aren't already particularly familiar with the publishing industry, there's definitely a faction that sort of feels most genre fiction in general is a bit lowbrow. And I'm not just talking about romance, really, again, any genre fiction. We're talking science fiction, fantasy, more pulpy, crime and mystery. The books that are most likely not going to be looked at for, say, the Pulitzer Prize or the big literati awards. And what's really interesting about that is that even amongst the genre fiction facets, there are definitely people who would still isolate romance as an even more lowbrow genre than the others. And that sort of sparks a lot of questions as to why that is, especially when you come to the realization that romance fiction outsells every other genre out there. Every other genre. It is a billion-dollar industry on its own. There are lots of questions as to why. There are lots of potential answers to that as well. And this documentary does a really good job of making that accessible. It also makes it really fun. We get to sort of see the history of the romance genre, how it has shifted over the years, and how today it's really very, very vibrant. Your romance tropes you find within every genre now. It's absolute madness, and it's really, really fun to see that kind of shift happen. It's also great to see women writers really reaching out to a primarily female audience and really make a vast amount of difference in the publishing industry as a whole. There's some huge trailblazing authors in here who we get to hear speak, who we get to hear talk about their experience within the industry. It's especially interesting when you hear the authors that were sort of pushed into YA fiction because they could not get published in your more straightforward traditional fantasy, and hearing about this journey and how things are really starting to look a little bit different. The publishing landscape is no longer what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, let alone 50 or 60 years ago. And who are these women who are making these changes, and how is that going to affect the publishing industry 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future? Again, this is one of those documentaries that I think is both incredibly informative because there's tons of information, but is a really fun watch at the same time. There's not a tone of like embittered frustration, which I think would be not unexpected, especially for some of the people who are talking, because it is their life and it is an incredible struggle for a lot of people to get taken seriously, despite the fact that they are putting out fiction that does do incredibly well. This was one of those documentaries that when it came out in 2015 did really make some waves. We were seeing another upswing of shifts and changes within publishing industry, and even within the last, 9 years at this point, we are in 2024, there have been a huge number of shifts that we've seen just within romance fiction itself, but also within the publishing industry at large. So if you're at all interested in the history of fiction, in the history of publishing, if you're just interested in women's studies, in just general history at all, or if you just really like reading, this is 100% a documentary that I think you should check out, because it is a really timely and relevant conversation that's going on in here, and hopefully will continue to be relevant as we go into the future with publishing. All right, so my next recommendation is available on Hoopla, and that is 2022's Fashion Reimagined. So within the fashion industry right now, we are seeing a lot of real change going on, particularly with these small brands, with small designers and houses that are looking into a more mindful way of producing collections. We're looking at using smaller materials producers and having a more direct line between them and our creators in order to sort of clean up a lot of what the industry has done over the years. You know, there are issues with dyes, there are issues with disposable fashion in general. And that's sort of the thing where, you know, you are able to get really, really cheap clothes that are essentially thrown out after a season only to pick up something new. Most of those clothes end up in landfills. There's a lot of environmental concern with this fast fashion forward sort of mentality to the industry. And we are starting to see a lot of companies looking back at more of a slow fashion consumer mindset. And when you're reading about this shift, when you are trying to participate in it, whether you're trying to decide if you want to be a part of it, it's kind of a whole lot of information all at once. And it feels in some ways very impersonal. Fashion Reimagined does a phenomenal job of making it very, very personal. It focuses on one young up-and-coming designer named Amy Powney. She's the head of this cult label, Mother of Pearl, that is very much mindful of everything that it does, of who the materials producers are, how they are treated, how their animals and product is treated, how we move from step to step to step to step, how the fashion that Powney creates is not designed to be thrown out after a season, how it's supposed to live and grow with us, how it's supposed to be universal regardless of current high street trends. And it makes it so there's more than just this message. There's a person behind it. There's a real driving force. And I think it makes this sort of passionate look forward at fashion so much more easily accessible. It makes it something that you want to look more into rather than just being bombarded by imagery and info. It's somebody's story. And it could be everybody's story. And I think that's important whenever you're looking at something that's a big potential change. We really get to see the arc of Powney's journey. You know, she started out this young up-and-coming Londoner, and she was given a grant for winning the Best Young Designer of the Year. And with that big cash prize, she decided that what she wanted to do was to start a line that was completely different from what she had been doing, what she had learned, what was the norm. And how is that difficult? How is that different? What kind of, you know, obstacles does she face when she makes those kinds of societal changes? Is it financially viable for both her or a consumer? And, you know, she's not American, and I know Women's History Month definitely focuses more on American history, but here's the thing, this kind of thematic could very easily be global. So it 100% could vastly affect the American public. It could make a huge difference in American fashion and the future of American fashion. And it already is. That's the thing. There are plenty of American companies that are approaching fashion in the way that Powney is. It's just this documentary does such a good job of sort of illustrating what is going on and how she is going about those changes from a design standpoint, not a consumer standpoint. So if you are interested in the fashion movement, if you're interested in environmentalism, if you are interested in consumerism, if you like hearing stories about small makers, because that's one of my favorite things. I love that this story is at its heart a small maker story. You know, this one was really, really interesting. It was really easy to get into, and it definitely has made me think a lot about the clothes that I buy and what I would like to see in my closet and why I should want certain things in there. Okay, final recommendation for this week is a little bit lighter, I think, but still incredibly relevant. This one is available on Hoopla, and it is 2021's The Real Taylor Swift, Wild Dreams. I have to be honest, I am not much of a Swiftie. I know who Taylor Swift is. I have followed her career as far as the things that she has done. I don't necessarily love her music, but this documentary is incredibly interesting because it does shed a little bit extra light on an artist that I do think is incredibly relevant and is quite important as far as the overall arc of music goes. You know, someone might not love Bob Dylan's voice, but you cannot deny the fact that he changed the landscape of music at the time when he was writing. And I think the same can be said for someone like Taylor Swift. She has definitely changed the way we look at how we market artists and how artists interact with their fans. She was one of the first people on board with social media and really opening up that gateway. And she's done an incredible job with it. Even if you hate her music, I think that it cannot be denied that she's an incredibly smart market woman. Like, she just is, like, she's done such a phenomenal job of everything as far as that aspect of the industry goes. Again, she has changed the way that musical artists interact with fans, and it's not going to shift away from that change. You can't go back to the days before social media and how there's such a disappearing wall between the two. There's the way that she presents herself as more your friend than the rock star or the pop star, I guess, is definitely here to stay. That approach is a tried and true method now. As of the date when this was published, she'd already had 200 million albums out, and I think that's significantly higher at this point. And the woman has done it re-releasing albums that haven't really changed. Like, that is some amazing, amazing marketing ability. I'm telling you, like, how? And you get to hear her talk. You get to hear her speak about herself, her fans, her approach to things. And I just was very, very impressed with the way she was presenting all of this information. And some of these interviews start when she's as young as like 14, and she's always been incredibly well spoken. So, you know, if you're like me, you know who she is and you're familiar with her music on the periphery of things, I think this one is a great documentary. If you're a huge fan, I still think it's great because you get to see that trajectory of her career. You get to hear her talk about music and about her writing and where she was and how she feels about it now. It also has outside information, say from other producers, some other writers, on how they view Taylor and how they view how she has approached things. And it's a very quick watch. It's about an hour long, so it's not like a huge time investment. But for both Swifties and for people who are not, who are even further out of that realm than I am, I think that this is a really worthwhile documentary just to sort of see how a really successful artist has managed to mold her image and her marketability in a way that is so, so incredibly effective. So if you have any interest in Swift, watch it. If you have interest in the music industry, watch it. And I think if you have interest in the music history or just basic history industries, this is absolutely a must-watch. Okay, so those were my 3 documentary recommendations for this week. If you have any recommendations, please pop those down below. They don't have to be about women in creative fields, but those are always really fascinating stories to hear about. If you have any recommendations for themes you'd like to see us cover, definitely share those. Always looking for help with that. As always, thank you so, so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye-bye.